Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start to talk about EU-China trade relations because this is significant. So when we are talking about the history between EU-Chinese relations, actually formal diplomatic relations were made since the mid-70s, and this is when they made the framework for establishment of bilateral relations. Then in the late 70s, there was the first Europe-China trade agreement. In the early 80s, European Community extends the generalized system of preferences to China, which means that after that, at that time it was the predecessor of the WTO, but since then, so actually they are using the lowest possible duties and customs in the foreign trade. There were some sanctions at the late 89s due to obvious reasons. And then actually during the 90s there was a strong recovery in bilateral relations. Then in the mid 2000s China became the EU's largest external supplier, and since then actually it became China's most important sales market. So there is an annual China-EU summit when they had many different sectoral dialogues where they want to refine the bilateral relations. So we can see that since 2002 actually there was a significant increase in foreign trade. So also not just import from China is significant, but also European export to China is increased by more than 80%, while import was also increased by more than 115%. So there was this golden age in the early 2000s. So what can we talk about interconnectedness? So nowadays China is the second biggest trading partner behind or next to the United States. EU is China's biggest trading partner, and actually what is the European objective here is to maintain fair trade, respecting intellectual property rights, and actually meeting obvious obligations under the WTO. Some problems obviously remained since the Chinese accession to the WTO, so we can say that transparency is sometimes problems. Sometimes industrial policies and non-tariff measures that discriminate foreign companies is still happening. Strong government intervention in the economy resulting in a dominant position of state-owned firms, unequal access to subsidies and cheap financing is also remaining, and poor protection of enforcement of intellectual property rights. So these points are usually evergreen. Okay, so what is the current strategic cooperation agenda? First of all, peace and security, which is nice. So it initiates the strengthening of the bilateral relations in the management of international affairs and in multinational organizations, so United Nations and G20. Proposes that the conditions for joint coordination and regulation can be created in certain key areas like trade, finance, environment, climate change, and info communication. Supports nuclear safety cooperation, also draws attention on security challenges, cyberspace, and cyber task force should be made or maintained. And also it emphasizes the constructive continuation of the human rights dialogue, also recommends regular dialogue on defense and security policy, and also maritime security and anti-piracy measures can be highly significant since most of the trade is conducted through navy and ships. So not through road or railway transportation or air transportation. And also recommends the strengthening of cooperation in humanitarian and aid issues. So it's nice. Economic recovery, trade and investment. So also high-level economic and trade dialogue should be maintained. Yeah, it's obvious. What is interesting here, this investment agreement, which can be really significant for individual member states and between China, and also the closer cooperation between China and the European Investment Bank and European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, so state-owned investment banks in the EU, or state-owned like-ish. Also, e-commerce, regulatory options can be significant. Actually, it's really interesting because nowadays they are closing down the gap. So in the past, e-commerce was much more open. So first, free shipping started to disappear. Nowadays, also VAT payments are starting to emerge in all pricing levels. So this. So in the past, there were periods when actually there were no VATs, and it was really easy to avoid or to bypass value-added tax and customs payment. Now they are closing down these opportunities, which is a nice thing for uh, competitiveness for local players, because if someone should not have to pay any kind of VAT, then it's obviously a kind of way of cheating with in trade, and also is bad for taxpayers. And okay, industry and information. So we can see that there is an industrial dialogue and a consultation mechanism uh, on the field of industrial goods, like in the automotive sector, energy efficiency, raw materials, shipbuilding, small and medium-sized enterprises, how they can support the trade of their products, supports the continuation of dialogue in the fields of information technology and telecommunications. In the field of economic recovery, agriculture and transportation and infrastructure was significant. So in the field of agriculture, actually food security, rural development, environmentally friendly agricultural systems can be significant, and also quality assurance of products. It's not just that you have to provide high quality products, but also that it should be accepted in the other region, in the EU or in China. So it's as important as the actual quality of the product. The bi-party acceptance. Supporting EU-China research and development cooperation on the field of food, agriculture and biotechnology by joint programs and researcher exchanges. In the field of transportation and infrastructure, actually infrastructure systems should be more integrated, more cooperated, also expanding logistics networks between Asia and Europe can be absolutely important because it can make trade cheaper and more reliable and more flexible, and also continuous development of infrastructural cooperation models should be necessary. And also there is the third point, sustainable development. So it means that scientific, technological and innovation cooperation should be pursued, and also this EU-China cooperation cluster can be created space technology cooperation should be also motivated, and framework of the energy dialogue, global energy security can be really important, uh, urban challenges can be important, and uh, greenhouse gas emissions, strategic policy framework, and so on and so on, and social policy issues and health can be relevant in 2020. And relations between people, so improving people-to-people contacts between you and China. Yeah. And cultural heritage and arts, culture and education centers. Education is a nice thing. And contacts between students and faculty and supports exchange programs. So, yeah, visa programs should be supported, and obviously tourism. Yeah, and actually use the current China strategy. So they declared for the next 5 years this point that uh, what is in their focus, but actually you can say that nothing new happened here. Uh, Globalization is one thing, and globalization of Chinese companies is one factor. Also, in the field of global economic governance, so for example, on the level of IMF cooperation, China became much more significant. They are now this, or in the last decades, they became donor countries. Also, their own region is also supported by regional financial funds. So there is a local version of crisis measurement. So they are not rely solely on IMF funds. They can extend this also with a regional fund as well. Of course, Chinese economic growth is slowing down for structural reasons, yeah, because now the base is not that small to have drastic growth. Uh, Now they are focusing on consumption-centric growth, and and also anti-corruption is a never-ending story there as well, not just in the EU. And role of market economy would need to be strengthened in some key areas for the EU, and restrictions of foreign players in China should be built down or abolished. Yeah. So, some agendas. Referral reform agenda, identification of common foreign and security policy interests, global governance and multilateral cooperation, and more unified approach towards China. This should be made. So the trade relation, we talked about it in the beginning part, but we can see that China and Europe trade on average over 1 billion euro a day. So it's the second biggest export market for the EU and also the biggest source of import for the EU. Mostly the EU imports industrial and consumer goods and machinery and equipment and footwear and clothing from China, while EU exports mainly machinery and equipment, motor vehicles, aircraft, and chemicals. And mm, and actually, we can see that services are even more significant than goods. So we can see it's maybe 20%. So we can see that who are the main players for international trading goods in export and import levels. We can see that first of all, both the EU and both China has trade surplus, and while at the same time EU in the United States has an enormous deficit. Also UK has trade deficit. Uh, Mexico, Canada, India has also trade deficits. And we can see that it's the biggest trade surpluses what we can find is also Russia, but the base is a bit smaller in this case. So cover ratio of international trading goods, we can see that in the case of Russia it's enormous, but because of raw material export, so you can remember on this on the presentation that they are highly different from structural point of view. Trade balance, we were able to see this. Actually, the situation in the US became even more terrible. So in the case of the European Union, there was this comeback from deficit to sufficit. In the US, regardless that what kind of uh, tariffs and customs and bans were emerged, actually it was highly counterproductive. We are looking on this. So okay, if we are looking on trading goods, then we can say that overall the EU had a deficit, but actually it had a surplus from trade of services. And actually this, no, we can't compare this. Exchange rate policy. We know that practically the renminbi was fixed against the US dollar. Nowadays they have a much more currency basket perspective. Uh, so actually the main trade partners are accounted, and this is how they are trying to fix the exchange rate. But the still the dollar is used on daily basis because it's simpler. So we can see that actually here there was a significant depreciation for the Chinese renminbi. Then it was fixed against the US dollar until the mid 2000s. Then it was following a crawling peg appreciation until 2008. Then it was horizontal. Then it was still crawling peg appreciation. Then it was crawling peg depreciation, appreciation and depreciation back again. So it's highly managed exchange rate regime. Against the US dollar. Against the euro, we can see that it's highly mimicking the euro US dollar exchange rate system with just some additional shocks. And also we can see the enormous foreign exchange reserves in China. Okay, some of them were converted to other currencies, some of them were converted to gold, so some of them were outsourced to sovereign wealth funds, so that's why this can be affected, but still we can see the biggest foreign exchange reserve on the world, so that's huge. If you're looking on gold reserves, then we can see that after the United States and the European Union altogether, we can find the biggest second biggest because Russia has bigger gold reserves. And it's also, we can see that the location is unknown, but mostly, or it should be supposed to be in China. Domestically, we can see some countries where they are locating or diversifying the location. So, for example, in Germany, we can find some of their gold reserves in the US or in England, or in case of Italy, we can find also in Switzerland. Yeah, gold reserves are huge, and that's also actually they are still increasing the purchases. So we can see that it was increased in 2006 by 80 tons. Okay, here I can see it. Ah, sorry, here's China. Yeah, it was in 2008 by 10 tons. And nowadays, if you are looking on it, it's still enormous. If you are looking on the sovereign wealth funds, then actually we can identify four sovereign wealth funds. Sovereign wealth funds are owned by the government, as you can remember from the Russian previous lecture. Just in this case, they have way bigger money inside. So we can see that there is the CIC Sovereign Wealth Fund in China, the National Council for Social Security Fund, the SAFE, and the China Africa Development Fund. So we can see that they are enormous funds to be used. And what is the future? Asking this question in 2008, that would be highly optimistic. So, see you next week.